Right now, you're warm. You probably don't even notice it, but you are. Somewhere on a wall in your home, there's a small dial, and the second the air dips below a certain point, a machine quietly switches on and fixes the problem before your body even has time to complain. You walk from a heated house, into a heated car, into a heated building, and the coldest moment of your entire day is probably the 10 seconds it takes to cross the driveway between them. For you, winter is barely an inconvenience, scraping frost off a windshield, grabbing a heavier coat, complaining that it gets dark too early. That's basically the whole ordeal. You've probably never once calculated how many calories you have stored away for the season, or wondered whether your shelter would actually hold through the next storm. But for almost all of human history, winter wasn't an inconvenience. Winter was the season built to kill you, and it never came at you from just one direction. It attacked from 4 sides at once. The cold could finish you. The hunger could finish you. The endless black nights could wear you down before either of those even got the chance. So here's the real question. With no furnace, no grocery store, and no walls that actually kept wind out, how did people make it through winter at all, for hundreds of thousands of years, across some of the harshest ground on the planet? Because they did make it. And the way they pulled it off is one of the most impressive things our species has ever managed. Start with the most obvious enemy, the cold itself. Here's a detail that surprises most people. The human body is basically a tropical machine. We evolved in the warm stretches of Africa, and left without protection, an unprotected human loses core heat fast once the temperature drops. Hypothermia can set in within hours. Fingers stop responding. Thinking slows to a crawl. Past a certain point, the whole system just shuts down. No claws, no thick coat of fur, nothing built in for insulation. By almost any measure, we're one of the worst equipped large animals on Earth for surviving a real winter. And yet humans didn't just tolerate the cold. They walked straight into it, pushing north into Ice Age Europe, into Siberia, into places where winter temperatures dropped far below anything a bare human body could handle, sometimes 40 or 50 degrees below zero for weeks at a stretch. No other primate has ever lived anywhere close to that cold without technology doing the actual surviving on its behalf. So how did they manage that? The first answer is fire, and we'll come back to what fire meant for those long, dark nights soon. But fire has a real weakness. It only warms the side of you facing it, and it doesn't travel with you the instant you step away to hunt or gather more wood. The cold rushes straight back in. Fire alone was never going to be enough. What people actually needed was a way to carry warmth wrapped around their own bodies wherever they went. And that led to what might be the single most important piece of winter technology humans ever invented: clothing. Not the version most of us picture, though. For a long stretch, the logic was simple. It's cold, so you drape a hide over your shoulders and call it done. And for a while, that's exactly what people did. But a hide slung over your back leaves gaps everywhere. Wind slips in at the sides. Your arms hang exposed. It slides off the second you move. A draped pelt beats nothing at all. But in a genuine winter, beating nothing still gets you killed. The real breakthrough was learning to cut hide into sections and stitch it back together into shapes built to match the human body. Fitted sleeves, closed seams, a garment that sealed a pocket of warm air right against your skin and kept it there no matter how much you moved. That's the entire gap between a blanket and a coat. But here's the catch. To pull that off, you need a needle, and not just any needle. One with an eye, a tiny opening small enough for thread to pass through. That's a genuinely difficult object to make. You take a splinter of bone, grind it down to a fine point, then carefully bore a hole through it, small enough to stay delicate, but strong enough not to snap. Researchers have found bone needles like this dating back more than 40,000 years, with some finds pushing the timeline even earlier. These aren't crude accidents, they're precise, deliberate tools, and whoever shaped them clearly knew exactly what job they were built for. The thread came from the animal too. Sinew, the tough connective fiber linking muscle to bone, could be pulled free, dried out, and used to bind hide into something that would actually hold under stress. Layer a garment like that with fur turned inward against the body, and suddenly a person could stand in air cold enough to kill and stay alive inside their own private pocket of warmth. Sewn clothing wasn't some minor comfort upgrade. It was the technology that let our species step outside the warm continent it evolved in and colonize the coldest corners of the planet. Take away the needle and the thread, and there's no human population making it through an Ice Age Siberian winter. None. We even know roughly what some of this clothing looked like, thanks to a burial site called Sunghir in what's now Russia, dating back around 34,000 years. The bodies found there were covered in thousands of small ivory beads, and the beads weren't scattered randomly. Their pattern traced the outline of fitted garments, close-cut trousers, long sleeves, even soft boots and a hood, all sewn tight to the body rather than draped loosely over it. Nobody buried thousands of hand-carved beads on clothing that didn't matter. This was serious technology, made by people who understood exactly how to keep a human body alive through an Ice Age winter, and it looked a lot closer to modern cold-weather gear than most people would ever guess. So now you're warm enough to move, to work, to hunt. But the light is fading, the temperature keeps dropping, and a second problem shows up that no coat can fix. You need somewhere to actually make it through the night. The obvious answer is a cave, and caves genuinely mattered. A deep cave holds a steady temperature, blocks the wind, and keeps snow off your head. But here's the part nobody mentions about caves. They're rare. A good, dry, defensible cave in a sensible location wasn't easy to find. And if you did find one, chances are somebody else wanted it too. You couldn't count on finding a cave. Most of the time, if you needed shelter for the winter, you had to build it yourself. And this is where things get genuinely extraordinary. At a site called Mezhirich, in what's now Ukraine, archaeologists uncovered the remains of dwellings built roughly 15,000 years ago. But the landscape around it had almost no timber and almost no usable stone. So the people there built homes out of the one raw material available in massive supply, the bones of mammoths. They stacked and interlocked the remains of dozens of animals into round, dome-shaped structures, hundreds of individual bones in a single dwelling. Jawbones layered like shingles, massive tusks arched over the entrances. These weren't quick, disposable shelters. They were genuinely engineered constructions, meant to hold firm through a brutal winter, and they demanded real planning and serious effort to put together. Inside a structure like that, every detail was aimed at trapping warmth. Floors got lined. At a site in South Africa, researchers found evidence of bedding built from layered grasses and leaves, arranged with real care, dating back a staggering 77,000 years. People were making their shelters comfortable long before our species had even left the African continent. The effort didn't stop at the floor either. Think about that mammoth bone hut for a second. Bone doesn't fit together seamlessly. There are gaps everywhere, and every gap is an open door for wind. So people sealed them, layer after layer. They stretched animal hides across the interior walls and pinned them over the openings. They cut blocks of turf and stacked them against the outer walls. Some groups even packed snow up against their shelters on purpose, since a thick layer of snow is actually an excellent insulator. It traps pockets of air, and trapped air holds heat. Bit by bit, the wind ran out of places to sneak through. A shelter stopped being just walls. It became a whole system, and it kept people alive on nights that should have finished them off. But a well-sealed shelter creates a fresh problem of its own, and it's a serious one. A tightly sealed dwelling traps smoke just as well as it traps heat. Burn a fire in a space with no way for smoke to escape, and you solve one problem while creating a new one that can genuinely kill you. So people managed airflow deliberately, keeping a small vent open near the top of a dome or angling an entrance away from the prevailing wind so cold air didn't pour straight in every time someone came or went. None of this was accidental. Getting the balance wrong, too sealed and you choke on your own fire, too open and the cold winds, meant these weren't shelters people threw together carelessly. They were tuned, tested, and passed down, generation after generation, until a design worked reliably enough to trust your family's life to it. And once a shelter proved itself, groups often returned to the same site winter after winter, repairing and rebuilding rather than starting over from nothing every single year. Keeping a fire burning through a long winter takes fuel, a genuinely huge amount of it. And gathering fuel means someone has to keep stepping back out into the cold, again and again, for the entire season. You're tied to that shelter. You can't just wander off, which means the food you need has to either be close by or already stored away. And that leads straight to the third threat, and arguably the deadliest one of all: hunger. Here's a piece of winter that modern life has erased almost completely. In winter, the land itself stops producing food. Plants die back or go dormant, berries disappear, roots become nearly impossible to dig out of frozen soil. Many animals have either moved on, gone into hiding, or grown thin and desperate themselves. For a hunter-gatherer, winter isn't just cold, it's the season when the earth quits feeding you, and that turns survival into pure arithmetic. You have to gather enough during the warm months to carry an entire group through months when almost nothing new arrives. So ancient people became masters of food storage, and they developed a handful of genuinely brilliant methods. The first was drying. Slice meat thin and let it dry, either in sunlight or over the low smoke of a fire, and you pull the moisture out of it. Without moisture, it can't rot. Dried meat could keep for months, and smoke added a second layer of preservation on top of the drying itself. A rack of drying meat in autumn was, in every practical sense, a group's insurance policy against starving by late winter. The second method turned the cold itself into a tool. Frozen ground works as a natural freezer. Dig a pit down into the permafrost, pack it with meat from a good kill, and the cold keeps it edible for a remarkably long time. Winter, the very thing trying to starve people, became the thing preserving the food that kept them alive. Some groups took this further, weighing down caches of meat and fat underwater in a cold lake or river, where near-freezing water kept the food just as stable as a frozen pit, while also hiding it from scavengers that couldn't smell it through the water. But the single most valuable food in winter wasn't meat exactly. It was fat. When your body is burning enormous amounts of energy just to stay warm, lean meat alone isn't enough. Fat is the densest energy source available, and deep in winter, it was worth more than almost anything else. Ancient people rendered animal fat down into a stable, storable substance, an energy-dense fuel for the human body. They combined dried meat with fat into a dense, long-lasting ration that packed enormous calories into something small enough to carry. In a season where every calorie counted, fat was the difference between a group that reached spring and a group that didn't. So now you're warm, you're sheltered, and you've stockpiled enough to eat. You've beaten 3 of winter's 4 death sentences. Food storage alone wasn't the whole strategy either. A single bad hunt, a single failed store, could still wipe out one family while a neighboring group had plenty. So many hunter-gatherer societies built strong systems of sharing directly into daily life, an unspoken rule that a successful hunt got distributed well beyond your own household. It looked generous on the surface, but it was really a form of insurance. Feed your neighbor today, and when your own hunt comes up empty in the dead of winter, that same neighbor is obligated to feed you. Anthropologists studying modern hunter-gatherer groups still see this pattern today, and there's no reason to think Ice Age humans worked any differently. The group that shared consistently was simply more likely to have every single member alive by spring than the group that didn't. But there's a fourth threat, and it's the one people almost never think about, because it doesn't attack the body at all. It attacks the mind, the darkness. In winter, especially the further north you travel, the days shrink and the nights stretch out brutally long. You might get only a handful of usable daylight hours, followed by 15 or 16 hours of cold darkness with essentially nothing to do. You can't travel far. You can't hunt effectively once the light is gone. You're confined to a small space with the same handful of people, night after night after night, for weeks at a stretch. That kind of enclosure, that constant waiting, can wear a person down in a way that cold and hunger never quite manage on their own. But here's what ancient people actually did with those long, dark hours. They didn't just endure them, they filled them completely. This became the time for every task that didn't need daylight or good weather. Sitting near the fire, repairing tools, shaping fresh spear points, mending clothing for the rest of the season, twisting plant fiber into cord, carving small objects out of bone. The long night wasn't wasted time. It was workshop time. The hours when a group got everything ready for the moment the weather finally broke. Some of that workshop time went into things with no obvious survival use at all, and that's exactly what makes it interesting. Archaeologists keep finding small carved figurines and simple engraved patterns at sites where people were clearly snowed in for long stretches, made from bone, antler, or soft stone. Carving a figurine doesn't feed anyone or keep anyone warmer, but it does something else. It gives a mind trapped in a small, dark space for months something to focus on besides the cold and the waiting. A group that kept its hands and minds occupied through the darkest stretch of the year held together noticeably better than one that simply sat and endured. And it was more than just labor. Around that winter fire, in the dark, is where people talked. Where elders passed down everything they knew to the young. Where stories got retold, the same tales again and again, carrying a group's memory and knowledge across generations. A huge share of what we now call human culture, the myths, the songs, the shared knowledge, was forged in exactly these conditions. In 2014, researcher Polly Weissner published a study examining conversations among the Juhowansi in the Kalahari and found that after dark, talk shifted almost entirely away from practical matters and toward stories, song, and shared ritual.
We have lived in this valley
Firelight
since the
itself
beginning of
seemed
time.
to change what people were
The
willing to
rocks
open up
remember
about.
our names,
People
and
pressed
so must
together
you.
against the darkness, keeping each other warm, keeping each other sane, keeping each other human until the light came back. Winter didn't just test the body in a strange, quiet way. It built the mind. And when you pull back and look at the whole picture, something striking comes into focus. Winter didn't just get survived, winter shaped us. Think about it. The pressure of the cold is what pushed people to invent fitted, sewn clothing. The scarcity of caves is what pushed them to invent real architecture. The seasonal gap in food is what pushed them to invent storage and preservation. And the long, dark nights account for a massive share of where human culture itself got its start. Nearly every technology that let our species spread into every climate on the planet was forged in the struggle to survive the cold. The harshest season on Earth didn't just fail to wipe us out, it made us far more capable than we had any right to be. So here's the complete picture. Winter came at your ancestors with 4 weapons. The cold, and they answered it with fire and with fitted, sewn clothing. The night, and they answered it by constructing shelter out of whatever the land offered, even the bones of mammoths. The hunger, and they answered it by drying, freezing, and rendering food into stores that could carry a group through months of nothing. And the darkness, and they answered it by turning the longest, coldest nights into the workshop and the classroom where human culture itself was born. Every single winter was a test that a great many people failed. Survival was never guaranteed. It was earned every single year through preparation, skill, and sheer stubbornness. And now look at you. You turn a dial and the room warms up. You open a door and there's food grown on the other side of the planet in the middle of December. You complain the sun sets too early from inside a house your ancestors couldn't have dreamed of, having never once in your life felt the specific dread of watching the first snowfall and wondering whether you'd stored enough to see spring. You don't survive winter anymore. You barely register it. And that's not because winter got any gentler. It's because 100,000 years of human beings freezing, starving, and huddling together in the dark slowly figured out how to beat it, one invention at a time, so that you never would have to. Every dial you turn, every jacket you zip up without thinking, every meal that shows up in December without a second thought carries a small trace of that 100,000-year project inside it. So, would you have made it through even one of those winters? Tell me honestly in the comments. If stories like this fascinate you, hit like. It genuinely helps the channel more than you'd think. And subscribe if you want more of how people turned the harshest conditions on the planet into something they could actually survive.